Hello everyone, Mr. Lipchick here, and our discussion today is going to be on the Presidential Cabinet. The origins of the Cabinet. The first Presidential Cabinet was formed by Washington during his presidency. The very first Presidential Cabinet consisted of Henry Knox, Secretary of War, Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury, and Thomas Jefferson as the Secretary of State, and Edmund Randolph as Attorney General. He regularly met with the heads of the Department of War and the Treasury and the Attorney General office. And he would seek their advice on policy matters. Cabinet Secretaries. Today there are 16 Cabinet Secretaries that head 16 major departments. They include, and the President usually chooses most of them before assuming office. They include the Vice President, Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Defense, Attorney General, Secretary of the Interior, Agriculture Secretary, Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Transportation Secretary, Energy Secretary, Secretary of Education, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and the Secretary of Homeland Security, which is a relatively new addition. Selecting the Presidential Cabinet. President's choice of a cabinet member is not only for his or her abilities, but also is a political decision. They should have expertise in the field in which they serve. They should also reflect the consideration of racial, gender, and geographic balance within the cabinet. That is, members should be a representative sample of the population. And political patronage and party loyalty are also influential. To the right, you see a picture of Hillary Clinton. By appointing her as Secretary of State, Obama solidified his Democratic base. He gained many of her supporters. The selection of the President's cabinet is largely a political process. The person will have to have some background in the department that they will lead. Secretary of Agriculture, for example, will usually be from a farm state. And the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development will usually be from the inner city. These appointments bring geographic balance to the cabinet. In selecting the cabinet, the President must satisfy powerful interest groups. The Secretary of the Treasury, for example, may be from business and finance, the business or finance industry. The Secretary of Labor may have experience as the leader of a union. Secretaries appointed must be competent and capable, and they have great responsibilities in regards to running their departments. Robert McNamara, for instance, to the right, was the Secretary of Defense for Lyndon Johnson, but made serious miscalculations about the Vietnam War, permanently scarring Johnson's presidential legacy. If they make mistakes, the presidents will be blamed for those mistakes, so they must choose carefully. Gender, race, and ethnic background has become more important over the years. Voting and political participation among women and minorities has increased. The first African American Department Secretary was Robert Weaver, appointed in 1966 by Lyndon Johnson to be the head of the Housing and Urban Development Authority, or HUD. When an excellent candidate is nominated for the job, he or she may not accept it. Most can make much more money in the private sector than is working in business. And those who do not accept who do accept it often do it out of a sense of patriotic obligation. Most appointees are leaders in their fields, such as law, defense, business, etc. For example, Eric Shinseki is the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs is a retired Army General and Chief of Staff, so eminently qualified for the Veterans Affairs posting. Nomination process. The President-elect creates a list of potential candidates by consulting with advisors long before taking office. They look for individuals who are qualified to deal with the current problems affecting the departments. And sometimes potential nominees are leaked to the press to get a reaction from the public. The Senate holds confirmation hearings before approving the president's nominee. Usually, the presidential nominee is approved, but not always. Holding up a presidential nominee is sometimes viewed as impeding the operation of the government and is not viewed positively by the public. For instance, Chuck Hagel's nomination as Defense Secretary was held up for a long time by the Senate. The role of the cabinet. Cabinet members are individually responsible for the departments that they lead. As a group, the cabinet is intended to serve as an advisory body for the president. Sometimes this happens as often as once a week. And meetings occur in the cabinet room of the White House and are closed to the press and the public. Presidents have used the cabinet differently throughout history. Abraham Lincoln put together a cabinet of people with different opinions who would challenge his decisions. Okay, an example would be Edwin Stanton, who had many disagreements with Lincoln. And historians call it the team of rivals. Many of these people had been contenders for his job as president. And 3 had run against him in the election of 1860. And he did this because he was essentially a man of great integrity who wanted the best possible decision for the country to be made. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR, put together his brain trust. He knew that economic problems that had caused the Great Depression were very complex, and he chose the greatest minds from the best universities to resolve them. Warren G. Harding hired his friends from his Masonic lodge in Ohio. They were notoriously corrupt and incompetent, and they became known as Harding's Ohio Gang. And they were involved in a scandal for selling public land. And they put the Masonic symbol that you see to the left on our dollar bill. Modern cabinets. Some presidents have tried to increase the role of the cabinet in decision-making. Eventually, however, they came to rely on them less and less. The president does not always have their complete loyalty. They have attachments to special interests and their own views. Cabinet members sometimes come into conflict over which should be in charge of certain programs. And there are also issues of secrecy and trust with such a large group of 15 advisors. Presidents have increasingly relied on their own advisors and to the executive office of the president. The inner cabinet. The cabinet members that work most closely with the president and have the greatest influence are known as the inner cabinet. There's Reagan to the right with his inner cabinet. And the inner cabinet, or kitchen cabinet, it is sometimes called, consists of the Secretaries of State, Defense, Treasury, and the Attorneys General. That concludes our discussion on the cabinet. Thank you for viewing, and I look forward to seeing you in the live lessons. Have a great day.